Hey, property management friends. Welcome to This Week in Property Management. I'm your host, Jeremy Pound from RentScale. And this week, we're taking a deep dive into where we think rental rates will go this year. Are they going to keep climbing because buying your own home is less affordable than ever and people have no choice? Or are they going to crash because there's more supply hitting the market than we've seen in 50 years this year? Now, it's really a classic battle of supply and demand. And even if you hated Economics 101 in high school, you're going to want to see the data and the trends that we're going to share today. We want to hear from you live, which is why we take the time and the risk to produce this show live every 2 weeks. So give us your thoughts and predictions in the chat box below. Even if you're watching this later, we want to hear from you. Okay, so let's share a few topics that we've been seeing this week in PM. Number one, I talked to the RentScale coaches and some Scale Club members this week, and I wanted to share a few thoughts and notes that we're seeing. Investors have been calling property managers more often recently. Now, they may be getting a little antsy because they aren't filling their time with buying and rehabbing new properties due to the near total stall that the real estate market has been in. But our frontline business development pros have been telling us that more investors with portfolios, sometimes sizable portfolios, have been calling them to kick the tires on their service and find out what they're seeing in the market. Now, if you've been watching the show, you know that I've been encouraging you to start building those investor relationships now so that you can already be a known source and a contact when they start buying again, which I believe will happen before the end of this year. Now, in addition to that, this trend reminded us that you should be calling your current clients just to make sure that they know what you're up to, that you're thinking about them, and to hear what's new in your market. Now, unfortunately, when we lose a client, we're often the last one to know that the customer was even unhappy or dissatisfied or looking at other options. So get on the phone or get in your inbox or get on video to check in with your current clients. Otherwise, they may be the ones that our people are hearing from that are currently your customers. The second, if we really do believe that the market will get unstuck later in the year and then investors will begin making purchases again, then you may be asking yourself, what can I do now to position myself for success when that actually becomes a reality? And one of our coaches here at RentScale, Jason, has been pushing our BDMs to find out who are the service providers in your market who specialize in 1031 exchanges. Are there CPAs or are there dedicated accommodators in your state or local area that you could be networking with today? Because when the deal flow actually does heat up, those are the people whose phone will be ringing first. So if you're serious about growing your property management company and you believe that investors will be getting back into growing their portfolio soon, now take that idea and run with it. And that may be a fantastic way to generate new leads before the end of the year. All right, I want to keep the updates brief so that we can jump into our discussion and look at some data about where we think rental rates are going. Now, make sure you're using the chat function to let me know what you think is going to happen this year. And feel free to disagree with me or clarify anything that I share with in this segment. I'll be looking in the chat box and I'll be responding to the comments as I see them. Now, we've definitely been talking to a lot of people about this. We've been doing a ton of thinking. Are you ready to hear our predictions? All right, let's jump in. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
Hi there. Did you know that RentScale hosts one of the largest communities of property management sales professionals in North America? Well, my name is Reese Register, and I'm actually a previous BDM and currently a scale coach here at RentScale. We provide over 20 hours monthly of teaching and training and accountability to make sure that our BDMs are supercharging their sales business through inbound, outbound, and allbound. So if you're interested in learning more about supercharging your business, go over to rentscale.com. We'll be glad to schedule a consult and see how we can help you transform your business today.
All right, let's bring up the data and take a look. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to share myself on a little picture-in-picture because we have the technology, so why not use it? Here's what I want to go over today. So what I want to talk about is 2023 trends, what we saw at the end of last year. I want to talk about some predictions for this year, which is really what you guys tuned in for. I want to talk about some data and trends to watch and how we're coming up with these ideas so that you guys can make your own predictions. Then I want to talk about 2025 and beyond, and where are some of these trends going to potentially take us that I think will be even more important and more useful than what we're seeing just this year. And of course, I want to talk about how I think you guys should be using this data in your market to be talking to owners, to be promoting yourselves, and to be an educated advocate for your clients. So let's start by talking about 2023. So I pulled up some data and got an email just after I announced that we were going to talk about this today from our friends at ShowMojo. And as you guys know, we had ShowMojo on a couple of months ago, and we were talking about what they're seeing. Now, all of the information they have is actually data driven. So these are not predictions. This is not what they think is happening. This is what they're actually seeing in their market. And what they're seeing is that their average days on market nationwide has really spiked in the second half of 2023. So you can see it right there, the top red line. If you're looking at that, you can see that the days on market has basically reached around 45 days on market on average for the inventory that they see. Now, if you compare that to the lines below, you can see typically near the end of the year that all of the other years have been dramatically less. So it is an upward trend. We're seeing that since June. And what does that mean for rental rates? It simply means that if people are spending more time on the market, that means that more concessions will happen. That means that renters can be more choosy, and we can correlate that and make a pretty easy assumption that that would either keep rent stuck or even cause them to sink. And so this is what we're seeing, and I think that that's a really important trend for us to look at. I also pulled up some information from RealPage, and RealPage actually tracked the rental increases by month over each year for the last several years. And as you can see here, 2023 is not the lowest year, but it's pretty close. It's second only to the pandemic induced year of 2020. And you can see here that basically rental rates on average rose only by about 2% last year, which is below average. And you compare that to 21 and 22, and even the 2010s average, if you want to go back that far. And clearly rental rates grew less fast in 2023 than they have in a long time. But let's also keep in mind that that is on the heels of some record-breaking years. So there's a difference between deflation and disinflation. So deflation means prices actually come down. Disinflation means that prices just grow slower, which is typically far more common in rent. It's rare that rents dramatically come down when you zoom out fast enough and you look at it as a macro scale. But what we saw is that basically a 2% rent growth was below what most investors would expect, but that was after 12, 14, and 10% increases the prior years. So you can imagine what that means. So if a rent went from $1,000 to $1,600 over the course of 3 or 4 years, and then only grew by a few dollars or $50 over the next year, that's clearly something to take into consideration as a trend, but it's also something that you want to keep in context to make sure that you're not overthinking that. Okay, so that's what we saw in 2023. We saw longer times on the market, we saw slower growth, but we still saw growth. Now let's talk about what we think is going to happen in 2024, and let's talk about how to look at this. So the first thing I want to say is, just like we believe there's no national housing market, we don't think there's any one trend or any one rate that we can apply nationally to all of the markets that rental rates apply to. As the old saying goes, all real estate is local, and that means that you need to know your market, and it maybe even needs to mean that you know your submarket. So I'm here in South Florida, and I know that potentially the rental market in East Boca Raton is not the same as in West Boca Raton. There are going to be different demands, and there's going to be different supply, and there's going to be different trends, different employers coming into the market, more people moving in and moving out. And so everything I'm going to show today is going to take into, it's not going to take into the context your local market. So what's happening in South Florida is probably different than what's happening in North Chicago, which is surely different than what is happening in East Vegas. So you need to know your market, and we're going to talk about that later and about how you can take everything we're going to share today and apply it to your own market. So again, all real estate is local. We've seen it over and over again. There are markets that have rent increasing, where there are other markets that are stabilized, and there are other markets that are decreasing. But I think in general, we're going to share some trends today that are really worth looking at, that you can extrapolate what's going to happen in your market. So This is our opportunity to give updates to our clients and for you to customize the information we're going to share today and talk to owners about. Okay, so let's talk about trends. Let's talk about things that are happening. Obviously, we have migration when anytime we're talking about rent. And so if you take a look at this graphic, you can see here that there are some states that have an influx of migration and movers, which means both renters and buyers. And there are states that are losing people, and there are states that are static. And so it's always important to keep this in mind. Now, this can change on a dime, but we know that there's been some common trends, and we should be aware of those, and we should be taking those into consideration. So what we found out is that we basically wrapped up the year last year with an average median US asking rent of $1,964. So that's kind of the baseline that we want to apply everything or compare everything to as we move into 2024. So this is your opportunity to take inventory and say, hey, is that the median asking rent in my market? Am I double that? Am I 25% lower than that? So when you think about these trends and you think about everything we're going to share today, anytime you're seeing the kind of up 2% or down 5%, it's all going to be taken within context of this graphic. So it's really important to point out. Now, in addition to the fact that all real estate is local, there are different types of real estate. There are Class A properties, as you guys know. There are Class B properties, and of course, there are Class C properties. And so a lot we're going to talk about the trends today. Some of those trends are going to apply just to A-class properties, and other trends will apply to B-class and C-class properties. And I think there's a specific trend that will apply really heavily to C-class properties. So as we walk through these, again, think about when you're talking to somebody, what type of asset are they managing? Are you managing for them, or what type of asset do they own? And how do you apply these trends to that? So I want to basically walk through some trends that we're seeing and talk about how this is going to happen. So the most important thing to think about is inventory level. So as you guys know, everybody's talking about there is a shortage of homes in America. This is a great thing for anybody who's investing in real estate or anybody managing real estate. So this is a graphic that basically showed new housing starts or new housing completions throughout the last 5 decades up until 2022. So as you can see here, that white line going across the middle basically showed the average annual units completed. And as you can see, we way overdid it pre-housing bubble of 2008, the total bust, and then we maybe overcorrected after that for the last decade. As you can see here in the 2010s, we're substantially underbuilt in terms of housing inventory. And if you know anything about demographics and you look back, we are not understaffed, for lack of a better term, in terms of new households being formed. There are more people moving into the country. There are more households being formed. We're going to talk about that in a second. There are more millennials turning 30 to 40 than ever before, and there's more and more demand for housing. So we're clearly underbuilt when we look at this. Now, that trend has been talked about so much. It's probably not the first time you're hearing that. And so what's happening is because of that, everybody got back into the market. And as you know, there was 1 million funds that were created for multi-family housing, and it became very on vogue and very in trend to get into multifamily, and lots of developers started building bigger and better and bigger complexes than ever before. And so we are basically on track to release more new units that are multifamily units into the market than we have since the early 70s. So 50 years since we've seen this many new units come online. So when we talk about supply and demand, like I made the joke in the beginning, you can imagine that we are way over in demand for housing units, but we are about to get a giant shot in the arm of inventory in 2024. And so this has been happening, as you can see, the trend, basically, these have all been started in the last 5 years, and many of them are already online. You maybe see them when you drive around town. Again, every market is different. I'm here in Boca Raton, and I can tell you, I see cranes everywhere in Lauderdale, in Miami, in West Palm, in Boca Raton. There are these towers going up constantly, especially if you visited Austin or Nashville, you've probably seen them everywhere. So with all of these units that have been under construction, we basically have about a third of them that have been in construction the last couple of years already online. So about 446 projects completed. And then we've got about twice that that are 5 units or more that are still in construction that will come online potentially this year. Without delays, which obviously happens in construction, all of these should be online this year. But less than the numbers, I think that the trend is obviously what we're all looking for. There are more and more units coming on. Now, I talked about what this means: A class, B class, C class. We have this dramatic mismatch of the need for housing, the type of housing that we need versus the type of housing that's being delivered. So we have an insane mismatch for affordable housing, for starter housing. And this is why so many young people are still living with their parents, or they're rooming up together, or they're waiting longer to buy their own home. Because all of those numbers that you just saw, that dramatic end of the chart in 2024, those new units coming on, they are not only A class, they are potentially the highest luxury version of A class that we've ever seen. If you've gone in and visited any of these apartment buildings, you will see all of the amenities that they have. You'll see that the materials they have, the codes and the standards that we require builders to follow these days are higher than ever. And so it just doesn't make economical sense to build anything that is not ultra A class or luxury. And so these units can come online and they can be 30% to 50% more than what else is in the market. And so as that glut comes on, that is an A class product. And that is going to create a ton of pressure and supply on A class properties. Now, some of the B class property people might be moving up economically, or they may feel the pressure to upgrade to the new units, but they're probably not going to be brought into this market. But it does create a ceiling for a B class property. So if you were an A class property that was built 10 years ago, and you're across the street or down the road from a brand new ultra luxury property, it does put a ceiling on how much you can raise your rent as a B class property. Because if you raise it enough, they're just going to look down the street and say, I'd rather go live over there with the movie theater and the golf simulator and the gym and the private chef or whatever else they're offering now, versus investing in your property. I don't think this is going to have any impact at all on lower B or C class properties, but it's surely something that we need to be thinking about with our A class properties. Now, again, no solution to the C class affordable housing or lower B class, which is crazy. So we have this dramatic mismatch between the new product being built and where the demand is. And so what do you think that is going to do to your A class properties that are 5-10 years old? What do you think that's going to do to the really hot towns where all of that construction is happening, like I just mentioned? And what do you think is going to happen if people are moving out of your area and new property is being built? So we definitely have a conflict here for a multifamily product that is A, B, or C. I'm going to talk about type of product in just a moment, because I think a lot of those trends are going to affect single family, but not have as much of a impact on them as you're thinking about. So what's another trend that we need to be thinking about? Let's talk about all of the immigration that is happening in the US. We have a spike in legal immigration and we have a spike in illegal immigration, and you've seen the headlines, but more and more people are coming in. And if you see the numbers, we have somewhere between, I think it's 5 and 10 million immigrants entering the country every year. Now, some of those people are coming in legally, and some of those people are actually coming into a higher class product. They're going to have the visa exchange program. They're going to be able to afford a higher end product. But a lot of these people are going to move into some government subsidized housing. So when you think about the pressure on C class properties and the fact that a lot of this, I think the government has no other alternative or option other than to subsidize some of these properties, I think that the squeeze on C class is going to be huge, which, other than in rent controlled areas, I think that the squeeze on C class properties is going to be crazy, and it's going to cause the demand, therefore the price, to go up dramatically. You say, well, those people can't always afford more rent, but I can promise you when the government steps in and they're subsidizing it, something's going to happen there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I thought a lot about this. I've talked to a lot of people, and nobody really sees any reprieve in what might be considered, the more affordable or the lower end housing product when it comes to rents, which means rents are going to have to rise. And that means that there will be more money to build more, hopefully. Otherwise, we have an unbelievable crisis and no solution in sight. So think about that. Now, that's a thought on A versus B versus C. And I also want you guys to know that we have another trend that's really worth thinking about. I've been talking about this for a while, especially when housing values shot through the roof and a lot of investors started to sell their product. But I don't know if you know this, there are more 30-somethings and households being created than ever before in history this decade. So if you look at this chart and you look at the blue line, there are going to be more 30 to 40-year-olds than ever before in the decade of the 2020s. And those people have been living in these multifamily products for years. Many of them are having families, many of them are expanding their families. As you guys know, there's also upward mobility. A lot of these people are entering the peak earning years of their lives. Now, if they can't afford a home, they're going to be thirsty and starving to move out of these multifamily products into what I call, kind of a four walls of the backyard, that garage and backyard experience. And they're going to be wanting to move into these homes. If they can't afford to buy, then they're going to want to rent. And I don't have graphs the way that I had for multifamily, but I can assure you there is no reprieve in supply for single family homes. So short of some of those build to rent areas that we've looked in, like Ocala, Florida, or in parts of like Huntsville, Alabama, where they're just literally throwing up home after home, they're selling them to investors who want to rent them. There's not a ton of inventory coming on for the people who really dream of the backyard experience, having a garage, and really moving into the kind of home that they grew up in. So I think that's going to put a ton of pressure on single family rents. Now, this year, I don't know if those are all going to take effect. I would venture, I'm going to use Real Page's forecast here, that we're going to see again a disinflation environment. We're not going to see drops, but we're going to see smaller increases. So I think that their prediction of around 1% to 2% range for most properties is right. Obviously, there will be the areas, I think I might be in one of them in here in South Florida. There's other areas where they might overachieve and they might hit 3 or 4%. And then there will always be the areas that even have a slight decline because they have a migration pattern that is not working in their favor, or there's so much new inventory coming online that they can't even compete with it. So that's what I'm thinking for 2024. I'm thinking that essentially we're going to continue to have small increases. It's very tough to see the data because unlike home sales, leases typically don't renew except for once a year and sometimes even twice a year. And so it takes a long time for these changes to actually cycle into the data. That also makes the rental market more resilient to spikes and drops. Because if the lease is not up for renewal, it doesn't matter if we have a wild swing in rental rates up or down. Those won't actually be taken into consideration for a while because people will be into the lease and not able to make that change. So that's what I see happening in 2024. Now, I shared some trends with you about inventory, about migration, and of course, about more people forming households than ever before. Now, I also want to share one more thing with you before I move on to what I think is going to happen after this year. That is just a reminder of another common graphic that a lot of people have seen. That is the current disparity in buying versus renting in America. So as you can see here, we have the biggest difference in the average cost of renting versus buying. And that is essentially almost 50% from what it would take to buy versus rent. And so if somebody doesn't want to buy and they're already renting and there's not enough inventory, you can start to fill in the blank on what's going to happen. So a lot of people think that it's going to be smarter to rent, and they may be right for a little while. But if more and more people are deciding to stay renters or become renters because they're selling their homes, they're forced to move due to a life circumstance or do a job change or a location change, it's only going to drive up the demand for rent, which I think is going to exacerbate all of these things. So when you take into consideration this idea of demand outpacing supply, you take into consideration that there are more people moving into the country and there are more people aging into the age where they want their own home, which means more household formulations. And you take into the fact that nobody's building because of the interest rates and all of the issues and the cost that it takes to build. So when all these multifamily homes come online and they see a slowdown in leasing, and maybe even their lease rates have to come down because there's so much supply, all that's going to do is hit the brakes on building. And so I have seen a lot of very smart people talk about a dramatic slowdown in new construction. Now, not only in single family, which we know has been here, but also in multifamily. And so what I see is a lot of downward pressure and brakes on new construction. I see an unstoppable trend of more families and more population. And so I think that while we'll have a disinflationary environment with a couple of percentage points this year, I think if you zoom out and you look ahead at 3 years from now, especially when you think about a single family home experience, I just can't see how these rents are not going to dramatically increase. And there's going to be so much pressure on these. And of course, governments can step in and they can try to stamp it out. But I don't think that will happen, because if there's just not the supply to fill that need, then those homes are just going to basically go into decay, and all kinds of other problems are going to be created if they're not able to charge market rent and be able to keep up with the cost to repair those homes and move through all of those homes. So that's what I'm seeing happen. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I want to talk about how I think you should be using this information, because I think it's super important. Now, I shared a lot of concepts with you that may apply to your market and they may not apply. But there's a lot of stories in there, and there's a lot of concepts that you can go out there that will resonate with people when you're telling those. The supply versus demand, the buying versus renting gap, the trends we're seeing with the millennial rates. We're thinking about the average rate and how much it's gone up, and we're talking about migration trends and also immigration trends. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word there. So when you think about that, I just can't really see anything that would cause rental rates to crash or to stop from growing. So it's something that you guys should be thinking about and putting into your own story with your own market trends, using local employers, using local trends, and everything else you should be doing. So that's what I think you should be doing with this info. And again, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now, let's look at some upcoming events in the property management space. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Strategic PM, the magazine for property management entrepreneurs and executives. If you go online to strategicpm.com today, you're going to find an entire website full of content written about your industry and by your peers. And it's completely free to sign up. Just go ahead and click on the create a free account right in the upper right-hand corner. When you click on that, not only can you create a digital account, but you can actually add your mailing address, and we will send you a free 1-year subscription of the print magazine, which will be showing up in your offices every single quarter. So if you take a look inside the magazine, what you're going to see is that we are focused on growth. We've got 5 pillars of Strategic PM: vision, strategy, culture, marketing, and experience. You're going to be seeing some great high-class content from some of the best thought leaders in the industry talking about the matters that matter the most to your business. So sign up for free today at strategicpm.com and look for the magazine in your office. All right, let's look at the events. It's finally here. I'm excited. This weekend, Jen and I are speaking at the Key Renter Franchise Annual Summit on the cruise ship leaving Fort Lauderdale, which I'm very excited about. So Key Renter friends, I will see you there. February 6th, coming up soon, the BizDev Mastermind Seminar is in San Antonio. So check out more information there. And if you're local, you can probably still sign up. There's also the Rental Pro Summit Virtual Conference, the first one of its kind. It's February 6th to 8th, and we're going to drop in a link so you can sign up below. We've also got some state conferences coming up, the first of which is the North Carolina Property Management Conference. It's February 28th and 29th. We'll have some people from Rentscale there, and we see a lot of friends, and we hope to see you guys in Charlotte, North Carolina. The next one will be California. The California NARPM State Conference is March 28th and 29th, and it's in Napa Valley. Always a favorite location of mine to visit. Got a more local conference coming up in April. April 8th and 9th, Denver is hosting their annual conference. And this year they're expanding from a 1-day to a 2-day. I'll actually be speaking at that conference. And so if you're in Denver, hope to see you there. There's still some spots to sign up. Now, we also have, excuse me, a webinar coming up here at Rentscale. So I'm really excited to tell you guys about. We have, in honor of Valentine's Day, a Learn to Love Closing Again webinar. You can sign up. It's a link that will drop in below. It will be about 90 minutes, and it is in the last week of February. We'll have a whole training where we walk through a number of ways that you can be talking to property management owners more effectively so that you are more influential and more compelling and that more of them sign up with you. So hope to see you there, and we'll tell you more about that on a future episode. So that's it for the event calendar. I'm off to speak at the Key Runner Summit Cruise this week, packing my suntan lotion and ready to go. But I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. And you can like this page to be notified when we go live next. And if you found this interesting, please share it with someone else in the industry. And we love to spread the word. Till then, that's what's happening this week.